Good Friday morning. Welcome to Millvale, Pennsylvania. This is the River's Edge, and I am Matt Geitka. G-A-J-T-K-A is how you spell it. Anyway, you spell it. How you say it is Geik's Got Game every Friday morning from 10 to 11 a.m. Happy to be with you once again. Brian Crawford is with me alongside, hoping not to disrupt the green screen with my rather loud Team Sweden hockey shirt this morning. And yes, hockey will be on the docket, as it usually is, on this edition of the show, in addition to much more coming up in the next 50 minutes, right around there. In fact, we'll take it to the 11 o'clock hour, as we always do, from Mr. Small's Theater, a historic place, a historic location in Pittsburgh entertainment history, and so pleased to be with you once again from this spot. You can find me on social media at Matt Geitka. I already spelled the name for you. That's on Twitter. On Facebook, you can find me at Matt Geitka Media. And that's probably where you're watching it if you are watching on Facebook Live. And, good to spread the word on this show as much as we can, and on the network, on the River's Edge. Just go to riversedgepgh.com for more details on all of our community initiatives and getting the local music scene a little bit more of a platform. That's what we try to do here, in addition to the local talk scene with this program and many, many more. Well, coming up in the hour, and you have to pardon my voice for the next 50 minutes as I'm on the back end of a cold here. That's what happens when the weather changes as abruptly as it has in this month. But grinding through it for you, and happy to be here to be able to do that. I'm upright, and so I'm coming in to do the show, no doubt about it. But later in the hour, I mentioned hockey. The Penguins' big win last night at Calgary, big in a literal sense, 9-1. They matched their biggest margin of victory in a road game ever, and that might be a little bit of window dressing for a so-so start for the team, but I want to talk about how the Penguins and their coaching staff in particular are trying to make the most out of a bad move from the front office. And you might know what I'm talking about, but whether you do or you don't, whether you can read through the T's or not, hope you stick around for that discussion. Also, if you're a fan of offense and you like goals like I do, then there are some encouraging trends. I know it's early in the season, and typically there are more goals scored in October than there are in March and April. That's just the way it goes. As teams are a little more loosey-goosey this time of year. We've discussed that on this program in previous weeks. But I think a lot of this will stick, and I'll tell you the reasons why, and much of it has to do with the long-term trends in the NHL. So we'll go to our good friends at hockeyreference.com to deliver some of those, and one of those trends that I think is perhaps the most encouraging. And a lot of them are encouraging if you like to see score lines more like 5-4 as opposed to 2-1. But to start today's program, it's a theme I've hit on in the past very frequently on this show, and it's a reason why I don't like to call this regular sports talk radio, because I don't like to be overly critical. I don't like to be overly destructive, more to the point. I want to build people up. I want to use sport as a force for good, ultimately. And that's why I enjoy speaking with you, and that's why I like some of those who have expressed their enjoyment of the show, because I do it a little bit differently. I'm not here to knock people down. If they do deserve criticism, I'm going to do that. But I'm always going to look for answers. I'm going to look for solutions. And more to the point, I'm looking for ways to bring people together over sports, not make it yet another spot where we just yell at each other and make it such that it's a holy war when you talk about sports. Now, I get that the passion and the rival fan bases and all of that is a lot of what appeals to people about sports. It's like war games, right? I mean, the sport of football itself is a very literal war game, and maybe that's part of the reason why it's been so popular in this country in particular. You fight to win territory, right? And you think about it that way. You hear all these metaphors about the battle in the trenches and field generals and all that, and you might recall that old George Carlin skit or his bit about football versus baseball, and how football is so much more like war and baseball is much more pastoral and friendly. That was always one of my favorites growing up, getting into stand-up comedy. Well, I think I always lean more toward the way that we talk about baseball and the way that we talk about sports as a pastime as opposed to an obsession. And that's what I want to try to angle us towards here as a society, if I can do my little part here on my little show and in my little corner of the internet. And along those lines, this week was a big week for me personally, a project that I've been working on with friends of mine. We finally were able to reveal it to the world, It's something called Do-Goodery, and you can find it at do-goodery.org or Do-Goodery Social, no spaces, no punctuation, on Twitter. And part of my job at Do-Goodery is to try to angle my love for sports and leverage my love for sports and the audience that I've built up as a result of that into getting people more involved in their communities, more interested in charitable causes, and just trying to be a force for the greater good as opposed to just fueling our obsession and our distraction from the real world. Because, well, what good, if you think about it this way, what good are sports if it just distracts us from the quote-unquote real world? And that's why I talk about the convergence of sports and real life on this show so much, because for me, sport, yes, it can be an end in and of itself. It can be an entertainment entity, and we all need entertainment, right? We all need to unplug and give our minds a break, and for many, sports are that. And that's where I do empathize with the folks who say, well, don't mix sports and politics. While I don't agree with that stance, I understand where you're coming from, because maybe you work in an area of life, or you have a vocation or a career that brings you into the world of politics a lot, or you find yourself debating things with friends and maybe people you don't even know on the internet, and you want to find a way to get away from that. And so sports is your avenue away from it. So I do want to mix in whenever I do a show like this or other methods of sports, whether it's broadcasting or writing. I do want to provide some of that and some of that fun. And I think fun can be tied into doing good. And so that's why I'm excited to be partnered with my good friend Rocco DeMero and many others on Do-Goodery. And I encourage you to check out the site. I'm going to have plenty of both traditional sports writing. For instance, I wrote something about Doc Emmerich of the NHL on NBC and how he compares to a Pittsburgh media icon. I think you might find that very interesting. I got some good feedback on that one, so thank you if you have checked it out. But also how my obsession for fitness, which I've talked about on this show, and wellness, maybe more generally speaking, can also help us understand each other and can also bring us closer together as a people, and we can help lift each other up. So I'm really excited about the project. I'm happy to be able to finally talk about it. It has been a while. We started discussing things, at least myself and Rocco, formerly of the Pirates pre- and post-game shows, you might remember. Several years back, he's also worked in the video game entertainment industry, and he's had a couple of successful independent podcasts, and we're looking forward to just stretching our multimedia legs out there on Do-Goodery and leveraging entertainment and fun, and also getting people interested in, to start some local nonprofits here in Pittsburgh who are trying to do some great things. And included in that is one that's very focused on sports, and that's the Cameroon Football Development Program. And you might say, Cameroon, what does that have to do with Pittsburgh? Well, number one, there is a connection with the local nonprofit that I just mentioned, Cameroon FDP. It's, I think, instructive to think about sports on a worldly basis, and I'm glad that right here in Pittsburgh we have a nonprofit that does that and tries to encourage the growth of sport in a different country to help empower people who might not be empowered, whether it be all the way over in Cameroon or right here in Pittsburgh. And what's interesting is that Justin, the founder of the Pittsburgh branch of Cameroon Football Development Program, studied abroad over there, so he has a tie to that. It's near and dear to his heart. But the magic of modern day society, right, is because of the internet. It doesn't matter where you are physically. You can help out anybody on the planet, or you can push down and discourage anyone on the planet for that matter. But we try to focus on the positive side. You can use the power of the internet to your advantage, and you can attract attention to charitable causes, or maybe not even charitable causes, just causes that are constructive for society and make people feel better about themselves. And I'm reminded of, lest you think that all corporate entities are bad, and I've heard that viewpoint. I don't necessarily agree with that, because there are people behind corporations, and you look to the people at Tim Hortons who put together that amazing social media video that a lot of us saw a couple of weeks ago, where a group of hockey players from Kenya, yes, that's right, Kenya has hockey players. They have one rink, I believe, and it's in Nairobi. It's in a hotel, and there are men and women there who have for whatever reason, whether it be by influence of visitors, people from outside the country, or just watching hockey on the internet, they've fallen in love with the sport that so many of us, including myself, are so enamored with. And Tim Hortons flew this group of Kenyan hockey players over to play a group of Canadian firefighters in Toronto. But, that in and of itself had been a lot of fun to be in the birthplace of hockey for these people who are, in a lot of ways, proselytizing, for the sport in East Africa. But both Sidney Crosby and Nathan McKinnon of the Colorado Avalanche both took part in that game, and they got to meet the Kenyan hockey players who were just blown away, seeing these guys that they've seen work their magic only on small screens, only on their laptops back home or their cellular phones, if they had gotten a chance to watch them at all. And then they get to play with them, and you just see this convergence of cultures. It's such a shocking juxtaposition. Kenyan hockey players playing in Canada, in Toronto, at the home of the game. And it just brings to mind all the things that I'm talking about, whether it be with the Cameroon Football Development Program. You can follow them on Twitter at CameroonFDP and search them out on Facebook if you are watching there. Or whether it be the Kenyan hockey players with a little bit of a help from the corporate dollars of Tim Hortons. Or whether it be just one of us out there trying to accomplish goals, trying to stay in shape, trying to push each other and compete. And as a result, when you want to compete, you got to seek out other people. And I think that is a tremendous instinct. I think that's a force for good. So you'll be seeing all of that, those sorts of things, plus much more over at Do-Goodery. That's do-goodery.org. And like I said, I'm very pleased to be able to finally talk about it. It's been in the works for close to 9 months now. And it's a passion project for sure. And if you want to help out, in fact, just go to the website. We have a Help Wanted post up. We're looking for more folks who have experience in the corporate world, whether it comes to managing people, in IT, social media. We could use a lot of help there. So if I may, I want to use this platform to put the word out in that way. And I think it dovetails very nicely with what I frequently talk about on this show. So it makes a lot of sense, doesn't feel like it's shoehorned in or anything. I want to use sport as a positive force in the world, and I hope we all can do that, as opposed to just yell and snipe at each other over our disagreements over whether a player should have been signed or should have been traded, or whether an ownership group is committed. Pirates fans know what I'm talking about. In the end, this is all designed to bring us together, right? That was the thought when these entertainment entities were conceived way back when, and that's what it is, entertainment. But we can use entertainment not just as fun and frivolity, but also as a real powerful push to, as Abraham Lincoln once put it, find the better angels of our nature and push down the worse angels of our nature and move forward and try to become bigger and better people as a result. You're watching Gike's Got Game, or you're listening to it on riversedgepgh.com. Either way, I am humbled and honored to be in your presence on this Friday morning. Coming up next, man I'm always happy to be in the presence of, whether it be in person or, as you'll listen in just a little bit, over the phone. His name is Alan Saunders. He's well-traveled. I'm always grateful that he's able to carve out some time, because the man is very busy, especially here in fall. But I want to talk about youth sports. He wrote a very interesting column about high school sports in the area last week. I touched on it last week on my show. You can find it on Pittsburgh Sports Now. But Alan's always a guy who's trying to think about ways to make things better and make sports more of a fulfilling and positive experience for all. So I want to discuss that column, as well as hockey, the Penguins, and also why he is in sports in the first place. I'm curious to hear his perspective there. I am Matt Geica, and this is Gike's Got Game. Keep it right here.
Are you hungry for science? I'm Carissa Sedor.
And I'm Ralph Crew.
And we host the Carnegie Science Center's podcast, Science News and Cues,
also known as Snack.
Join us twice a month as we talk about exciting science news, answer science questions submitted by listeners, that's you, and dive deep into a cool topic every episode.
Curious about exoplanets, glowing animals, or even your own poop? Well, do we have the show for you?
We also feature special guests, from octopuses to famous YouTube science stars to NASA scientists.
Join us on Snack, and remember,
stay
hungry for science.
Welcome back inside the Mr. Smalls Theater studios, the upper room at Mr. Smalls Theater in Millvale. I am Matt Geico. This is my show, Geick's Got Game, and you can find it both live, as you are right now, probably, or archived at riversedgepgh.com. Brian Crawford is engineering, and time to go to the phone lines. As I discussed in the opening segment, I want to use sport as a force for good, and I know that a man who has people's good interest in his mind is on the line right now. His name is Alan Saunders. He has been a frequent guest of this program in the past, and in particular, I do want to talk about a column that he wrote for Pittsburgh Sports Now last week regarding competitive balance in local high school football and tying that into local high school hockey, and maybe both sides trying to take cues from each other, or maybe one side trying to take cues from the other in specific. Alan is actually not on the road right now, so coming to us live from his kitchen. And, well, I'm sure that's a relief for you. You're often away from home. So thanks for joining us, and good Friday morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Always appreciate being on. And, yeah, I'm relaxing this morning. I've got my show to do later today, and then I'll be out at the island for Rebel Morse Women's Hockey this afternoon. So, you can't keep me not busy for very long.
I'll be happy to see you down there at the island. I'm with the RMU men's hockey team, as I've described on this show in the past, from a media relations perspective. So we have a nice doubleheader down there. Thanks for the free promo at the island, 3 for the women and 7 for the men. Alan, I thought it was funny this week. Maybe it was yesterday on Twitter. Someone said that they haven't filled up the tank in their car 10 times in their life. And you said, I think I filled up my tank 10 times since Monday. You were just on the road down in Charlotte for ACC basketball media days. I just want to ask you a general question here. What motivates you? What pushes you to do all this? Because, it's no surprise, or it's no secret out there that, working in sports media is not the most lucrative business in the world. But I think you and I are both powered by passion. Most people who are in this business are. Where does that passion come from for you? Just curious.
I don't know. It's kind of addicting. I have to say, it's really, I love doing it. I don't. You couldn't do it if you didn't love doing it. I always say this. We have the best job in the world with the worst possible working conditions, just to tempt us to dare complain about it. Right.
Right.
Because I watch people play kids games for a living, and I get paid to do that, and that's pretty freaking cool. And I spend my days and my weeks talking to famous people about their life, and I get to meet people and get to go travel and all these awesome situations. But yeah, there's a lot about the job that isn't a lot of fun. There's a lot of travel. There's a lot of time away from your family. Pay the hours are ridiculous. You never really feel like you're ever off. You always have to kind of be worried about what the next Twitter notification or text message from your boss is going to lead to, and it's a hard life, but I love it. And I hate to. This is there's no good way to say this, but I feel like I'm good at it. When you do something,
yeah, that's something,
and you have some success at doing it, and you feel like you're accomplishing something. That's what we're all looking for, right? I mean, that's what everybody wants to feel like they're getting out of their professional career. And so, yeah, I mean, I feel I take a lot of pride in what I do. And yeah, I mean, I didn't say, I wasn't complaining about filling up my gas tank 10 times since Monday. I was kind of bragging about it, I'm okay with that. I like the fact that I work hard, and if that's what I'm known for, I'm okay with that.
Well, yeah, right. You bring up a good point, because there is something to feeling like you are good at something, and that you get that buzz from that, and at least I do. And or if I didn't feel like I was at least half decent at something, I'm not sure I would continue doing it, because I would think maybe there's a better place for me to be. And, maybe that's a luxury that some of us have in that way, and that we can pick and choose. But for the most part, it has been a joy for me. I know it's been a joy for you. And like I was saying before, I know you have people's best interests in mind. I know you look out. You want to make sure that this is all a constructive, productive, fulfilling experience, especially on the youth sports level. You have the website Pittsburgh Hockey Digest, you and Brian Mitchell together, and part of that is promoting the players who may not have gotten attention in the past. So I think along those lines was your column last week in Pittsburgh Sports Now about trying to figure out a way to make the WPIAL football product better and more competitive and making it a better experience for not just the people in the stands or whatever, or those of us who are watching from afar, but for the kids in particular, and making these games more competitive. And you brought up an interesting point. I think so many of us have it beaten into our brains from competing in high school sports that, well, the bigger schools compete against the bigger schools and the smaller schools compete against the smaller schools. But your proposal last week was that maybe we should look to PIHL hockey, local high school hockey, which bases their classes on success on the ice. Doesn't matter how big of a school it is or how small of a team you might have. Do you think that can be something that carries over to all sports? Is that feasible? And do you feel like that is more of the utopian setup, if there is one in high school sports?
I'm not sure it's necessary for all sports, but I do think it's necessary for football. I mean, if you look at, let's look at NCAA college athletics, right? In basketball, there are a significantly larger number of schools that are competitive at the highest level. I mean, you look at last year, with the Loyola's upset run, and in just small schools that have had a ton of success, Creighton, Wichita, Villanova. You don't have to Gonzaga, St. Mary's on the West Coast. You don't have to be Duke or Kentucky to be able to be competitive in basketball. There's only 5 players on the floor at a time. Getting one really good player has an outsized effect on your team's success. I mean, one really good basketball player can take a basketball team really far. One really good coach can take a basketball team really far. To win in football, you need 30 really good players and a half a dozen really good coaches. It is not a sport where it's also not a sport that's conducive to upsets just in general, the way it's played. It's a physical game where, there's little opportunity for a less skilled team to take advantage. In basketball, you get a lead. Oh, okay, we can slow it down, milk the shot clock. Soccer, you get a lead. Oh, we'll just park the bus and try to hold on to this 1-0 victory. There's no corollary in football, right? I guess you can try to run the ball a little bit and work the clock, but it doesn't work that way. The game isn't structured to be friendly to upsets in general. And then when you have a talent disparity and a skill disparity where you have, there's high school teams that don't really have a true quarterback that can stand there and pass. There's high school teams that don't have a kicker that can make a 30-yard field goal. Like, there's talent, and then there's a lot of individual skills that are required to play that game, and you have to have a lot of kids to collect all those skills. You might have 25 kids in your football team, but they might all be offensive linemen. You're going to have a bad football team. And so, I think for football specifically, just the way that game works and the importance that's placed on it in this area, I think it makes total sense for it to have its own thing. And the way hockey runs it, I think, would work pretty well.
Yeah, and to be clear, the PIHL awards points based on wins, and that's how they set up the classes, and that's how you see teams move up and move down. You don't really see that in other sports unless there is an increase or a decrease in attendance at said school. So it's different, and it's not perfect, I will admit, but I thought it was pretty interesting to see you make that comparison. You and I have talked about the hockey system here in the PIHL at least, and how we think it's pretty equitable. And in fact, you've suggested tweaks to that to make it more of a long-term thing than a short-term thing, but I think maybe neither here nor there. At the very least, the folks in football can take a cue from that. Let's talk some Pens hockey, Alan, and last night a 9-1 win over Calgary. That'll get people's attention, right? We talked about goals. When there are more goals, you might have more games like this. So it's not necessarily always the best thing for a competitive balance, but I enjoy a good blowout just as much as the next guy, maybe even more than the next guy, because, you can see some real outbursts and some interesting score lines out there. Now, when it comes to the Penguins, though, I'm not sure they've even played more than two really solid hockey games. But a game like last night, that doesn't, or that does for me at least. That reminds me of the potential in this club. I think we can all be a little bit short-sighted and trying to nitpick things, and then you realize, oh yeah, they're still one of those teams that can drop 9 on you, as it were, and they're still in that spot where they're maybe a move or two away from being right at the top of the league. Would you agree?
A wonderful perspective on the Penguins season, because I'm just colossally busy during the fall. I've got football and basketball at the same time until at least Thanksgiving and maybe New Year's, depending on how long Pitt plays in football. But I don't get into the everyday part of hockey until March, which is great because really nobody needs to get into the everyday part of hockey until March. It's a long season. We say this in baseball, right? I mean, hey, April stats, yeah, whatever. They don't really matter. Hockey season's roughly half as long, but it's still a thing where, specifically in the Penguins circumstance, when you have, a pretty good team and two of the best individual players in the world, they're not going to put themselves in some kind of terrible position that they're not going to be able to get out of. And it's also not particularly necessary that they feel like they need to win the division or, protect themselves with a better seed in the postseason or anything. Like, the Penguins could fast forward to the postseason in the next 2 weeks and probably feel okay about their chances. Like, it's just, I hate to say the games don't matter because they do. I mean, everything counts, but it's just hard to envision things going terribly off the rails. So I think what happens between now and then is just mostly figuring it out, fine-tuning things, figuring out what pieces aren't going to work and which ones are. But yeah, I can't live and die on every game in November and October. I just can't do it.
I think my involvement with college hockey more this season has also given me a better perspective on taking a wider angle view. And last year it was my job to cover the Penguins day to day, be at every practice, drum up storylines every day. So that's different too. I don't have the necessary drive in that way to try to break everything down and micromanage. Yeah, you and I think it's advised for most fans to at least take the season in some bigger chunks, maybe 5 or 10 game chunks, and evaluate those on the whole. Not to say that last night wasn't fun in and of itself. Not to say the game against Edmonton the other night wasn't spectacular. So early season hockey, maybe not terribly predictive, but it can be a heck of a lot of fun, as we've talked about in the past. Alan Saunders writes for Pittsburgh Sports Now, in addition to, you'll see his byline on Associated Press stories, and, he's also one of the head honchos over at Pittsburgh Hockey Digest. Will be at the Island. We'll be happy to see him at the Island covering RMU women's hockey this afternoon. Thanks, Alan, for your time, and I'll talk to you later. I'll see you very soon, in fact. That's Alan. I'm Matt. Back in a moment on Geiks Got Game. I want to talk about some very encouraging trends, if you're like me and you like offense, in the NHL. And these aren't just recent trends. At least one that I really want to hone in on. Very, very much a positive sign if you like to see more goals go in. And it's been going on for quite some time. We'll reveal that and discuss further in the third period of Geiks Got Game.
Hey folks, it's Mike Sasson of The Mike Sasson Show. Me and Alex, my producer extraordinaire, looked at the landscape of internet radio and figured if we want to make it, we've got to work. At least an hour earlier. Now on at 9 a.m. every Tuesday on the River's Edge, a new kind of radio.
Goals galore in the NHL this season, and I'm very happy about it. I'm Matt Geica. This is my show, Geiks Got Game, where we take a wider view and see how sports fits into the wider tapestry of life, and also dig down into the details. And I'm going to dig into some details here on the scoring output in the world's best hockey league in just a moment. But I do want to thank everyone who is watching and listening, whether it be watching on riversedge.com/live or on my Facebook page or many other Facebook pages where we have shared the show. And my professional page is Matt Geitka Media, and you can spell my last name Gajtka. And thanks to Brian Crawford for hosting the show on all these platforms. And Again, go to riversedgepgh.com for more about what we're all about. Local talk in addition to plenty of local music. You know that if you have been to the Millvale Music Festival or some other spots where we have played a role in setting things up and underwriting and just being supportive. We want to support, just like I was just saying in the opening segment of this show. I want to support people through sport, and I think both myself and Brian can say that we're pleased to be part of an effort here in order to lift people up on the local scene in specific. So thank you again for making us a part of your Friday morning or whenever you might be checking out the show if you are listening to the podcast. Thanks to Alan Saunders for joining me in the previous segment, and I thought it was interesting. He seemed to be a little bit taken aback by my question on why he does what he does, but that sort of thing does fascinate me. And why do you get up in the morning? What makes you want to do what you do? In Alan's case, it's drive 8 hours down to Charlotte and then back and hop around basically the Eastern Seaboard, mostly in his car, mostly covering college sports, mostly Pitt sports, in fact. And the job itself isn't necessarily lucrative, but like Alan says, it's a great job, whether you are a reporter or like me, you're more on the PR side these days, or you're doing broadcasting, what have you. It is addicting, and there is that thrill that you get from it. And there's no greater thrill than I get in life, at least in my career or in my professional life, than doing things like this, than hosting shows, than calling games, like we just saw last week with the Riverhounds, fortunately or unfortunately for their fans, out of the postseason after a loss to Bethlehem Steel. So, well, it frees up some more time for me on the weekends, but I'm sad to have that free time, if that makes any sense. But it was a very fulfilling experience to be a part of the resurgent season for the Hounds this year. Anyway, let's talk some hockey. Let's get into it in terms of what I've been teasing for the better part of an hour here. Goals are up, and all you have to do is open up hockeyreference.com, one of my favorite sites, if you want to look at trends, if you're into numbers and details and data, which I am. Hello. If the NHL season ended today, which it does not, but if it did, this would be the highest scoring season since way back in 1995-96, believe it or not. So far this season, teams are averaging 3.09 goals per team per game. So we're looking at, 6.18 total goals per game. We haven't seen a number that high in the NHL on a per-game basis, like I said, in more than 2 decades. And the closest we've had is a 3.8 mark per team per game, so just a little bit shy of this year. And that happened back in 2005-06 when power play opportunities went absolutely through the roof. You might remember that season as the league came back from the full-year lockout that nearly killed the sport at the highest level. And so desperation was high to get people to tune back in. And I think it wasn't a good place to try to crack down on obstruction and restriction, stick fouls, that sort of thing. Maybe they went a little bit over the top, but I think in the end it was a good force for the sport and has encouraged this younger generation to focus more on skill and speed than strength and brutality. And even though power play opportunities are well down from that peak, goals have been on the rise the last 3 seasons. In fact, last year goals jumped by 0.4 goals per game, which is a huge number. If you look at how this usually goes, for a while in the earlier part of this decade, we had how many straight years, 6 or 7, where the goals per game were within 0.1, and we had a 0.4 jump last year, and we're looking at another 0.2 jump so far this year. And typically this sort of trend plays out early in a season. As I mentioned, teams aren't quite locked down on their systems. Players are more having fun in some circumstances and chasing offense as opposed to really protecting their goaltenders. But this is enough of a trend that I think it has staying power. And when I look at some of the numbers here, almost all the indicators for offense are up, including power play opportunities, by the way. They're up by about 0.4 per game. But not only are goals up, but power play percentage, conversion of power plays, continues to rise. And that's been on the rise. You look back here since the turn of the century. We reached what looks to be an all-time low here. Now, numbers don't go all the way back before the expansion teams came in 1967. But in terms of the modern era of NHL hockey, about the past 50 years, we reached a low point in 1998-99 with a 15% conversion rate across the league. It's been slowly but steadily going up almost on a year-by-year basis. Now we're up over 20%, 21%, in fact, is the number there. And save percentage for the first time has taken a dramatic tick downward. So maybe goalies are being affected by this new crackdown on equipment. You hear a lot of goalies complaining about they're actually fearing high shots because the protection around their chest and arms isn't what it used to be. And we'll debate that in a moment, whether that's good or bad. I know the goalie guild hates it, but their considerations are to be taken into account. However, the power play thing I think is most encouraging for me. And why do I say that? Well, the opportunities may fluctuate, the number of penalties called may fluctuate, but if power play percentage is going up and up and up, it's not just based on individual skill, which I have attributed somewhat this rise in offense to individual skill and maybe offense being celebrated a little bit more at the youth and grassroots levels and being developed better, more to the point, at the youth and the grassroots levels. But power play percentage speaks to coaching, doesn't it? It speaks to systematic play. And for the most part, we think of systems and structure as being a bad thing for offense. And I think overall it has been and still continues to be more of a boost for defense than it is for offense. But with the man advantage, I think all the video that's in the game and all the study of statistics and metrics and tendencies has actually helped the power plays more than it's helped the penalty kills. And it makes sense, right? Because you have an extra man, you should be able to figure out some strategies there. And, not since the days of the 1980s when picks were legal, basically, and you think back, some old-time Penguins fans might remember the Eddie Johnson power play years of the early 80s when he was the Penguins coach. They ran a lot of picks. It was almost like a basketball-style power play, if you will, because of the, well, at the time, legal obstruction they threw out there. That's not legal anymore, but numbers are back up to that level. Teams are converting at more than a 1-for-5 rate. And for me, that's a panacea. That's something totally different. Like I said, this is coaching actually helping offense. This is a system helping offense. So that, maybe more than any other number out there, continues to warm my offense-loving heart, and I'm happy to see that number go up. But let's get back to the goalies, though, because I think this is important, too. I've often said that the NHL brand of hockey these days is more fast, more exciting than it's ever been. It's just that not as many goals are going in than they did in the 80s, than did in the 80s and in the early 90s, maybe into the mid-90s, in fact, before traps and obstruction, and really goaltending got a lot better, too, and you can see that from the save percentage numbers. And you can't always tell quality of goaltending from strictly save percentage. If teams are giving up better chances, then yeah, the save percentage is going to dip a little bit. But the save percentage is under .910 for the first time in a decade so far this year. It's at .909. And while still being above and beyond where anything was on a league-wide basis in the 80s, this is, I think, a positive trend for the game because just more goals start going in, and I've said this for a long time. If you believe on a scoring chance that the puck has a better chance of going in, you're going to pay attention more. You're going to perk up more as a fan. You're not going to think, of course they'll make the save here because these goalies are just so damn good. And I think the goalies continue to get better from a skill perspective, but now we see equipment continually shrunk little by little, not as much as I'd like to see, but you can only do so much. With players shooting harder than ever, you have to protect the goalies. Player safety is definitely a priority of mine, and it should be a priority of any league out there. And goalies are people too, obviously. So I don't want to necessarily pick on the goalies too much, but we're seeing more goals sneak through goaltenders' bodies, and the pucks aren't sticking to them like Velcro like we've seen in the past. And for me, that's good because that rewards the better goalies. That rewards better technique. And in fact, the better goalies should like this sort of thing. The better goaltenders overall, the more skilled ones, should enjoy the fact that they don't look like Michelin men in the net anymore because that will allow their skill to play, and in theory, they'll have more of an advantage over their lesser skilled brethren who might have in the past been able to lean upon huge shoulder pads and cheaters on gloves, if you will, and other areas where there was a little bit extra tacked onto the equipment. Jerseys used to be much bigger. Now they've cracked down on that, the league has as a whole. In the end, I still think I want to see the nets get bigger because that will ultimately allow the goalies to adequately protect themselves, and we see more goals going in. But at the same time, I also don't really I'm not terribly sympathetic to the goaltender's causes in this case, because in the end, you should have a little bit of fear as a goalie. There should be some thought that, do I really want to get in front of this one? Because that's what the game has been all about in the past. When Bobby Hall was teeing up slap shots in the 1950s and 60s, goalies feared for their lives out there, and that allowed more goals to go in. And I'm not saying that there should be that primal fear in everything, but goaltending was not intended to be a fearless position, is what I'm trying to say. And I think the smaller equipment has added to that. So as long as that trend continues in that direction, and we see power plays in terms of conversion tick up, then I think the league's going to be in a good place, as we have naturally from the grassroots, as I've talked about on this show in the past, offensive skill being more celebrated. You should see some of these young players coming up. I see them in college hockey, junior hockey too. Players who haven't even been drafted yet. Your Jack Hugheses with the U.S. men's national program in Ann Arbor. That's just one of many talent incubators out there. And I think individual skills are being more celebrated now in the age of social media too, but that's maybe a topic for a different time. Overall, if you like entertainment, I think you got to love the direction the NHL is headed in. My apologies to defensemen, and especially my apologies to goaltenders. One quick break here on the River's Edge, and I'll be back to wrap up the show with a short overtime segment on the Penguins doing what they can to make the most out of a bad off-season move. Back in a moment. Stay with us.
Come on, go! It's green! Come on! Go!
God damn it, Brian. You need to calm down
I'm
with the road
sick
rage.
of these people, these assholes.
The road rage, man. You got to calm down on the road rage.
Well, I want to get to where we're going. We have a lot of great stuff coming up. We're going to Falling Water,
Bicycle Heaven.
the Mattress Factory,
Tuck Knob.
Trundle Manor. All right, which way do I go? Which way do I go? Come on,
right,
come on.
right.
Too late now.
Right, come on.
Well, too late now. I got to keep going. I'm not going to sit here like some asshole.
Oh, come on, man.
All right, you're listening to the Culture Cruise. You can find us at riversedgepgh.com.
Your local Pittsburgh area museum podcast.
Yes, riversedgepgh.com, and come take a ride with us.
It's overtime on Gike's Got Game. Oh, you caught me off guard there. This is Matt Geica from the top upper room at Mr. Small's Theater in Millvale, Pennsylvania, top of the hill. And we can see for miles as, what was that, The Who? Is that The Who, Brian Crawford? I can't remember.
No, who? Who was the Who?
I can see for miles. Is that The Who or is that The Birds? That's from way
I'm
back
not sure.
when. Anyway, yeah. For any of my psychedelic rock questions, I go to Brian Crawford first on that one. Brian, I do want to ask you one quick thing, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And this is Brian Crawford, host of River Talk here on riversedgepgh.com. What do you think about offense in sports? Do you like to see more offense in general? Not to always position you as the casual sports fan or Joe's sports fan, but I'm a diehard. I'm in it. Sometimes I'm too close to see the trees for the forest, or whatever the expression might be. When you see a high-scoring hockey game or a high school football game, does that get your attention? Does that excite you more than something that's lower scoring?
Not necessarily. I think the opportunity for high scoring is more interesting. For example,
yeah.
I'm a big fan of the Premier League. There's not a ton of goal scoring in the Premier League, but there's a lot of offensive play.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I think it's exciting when there's this is completely different, I think, than where most of the public is. But to me, there's something exciting when there's not a lot of goal scoring, but there's always that chance, and you're waiting, and it's a much bigger deal when it happens. That's what I get out of it. I know a lot of people are on the complete opposite end of the spectrum from me. But there has to be play in the offensive zone, or else I will get bored. A lot of times in World Cup soccer, for example, there's a lot of play in the middle, which I enjoy and I appreciate, but I also enjoy when there's shots taken on net and people are trying, really hard to get it in. So to me, it's that offensive play, that offensive zone time that I really am interested in. But it doesn't have to necessarily be high scoring.
Understood. Okay, I get that, and hey, I'm a soccer guy. Like I just said, I called Riverhounds games this year. I've done it in the past. It's not like I need all the goals in the world. In fact, this year's Hounds team didn't score a ton, but I thought they were aggressive. I thought they were a counterattacking team, and like you say, English Premier League, probably the best league in the world when it comes to aggressive play in that way. So yeah, you can watch that on NBC Sports Network every Saturday morning, basically year round. And like you say, in the World Cup, maybe some teams feel like they're overmatched, so they don't try to open things up too much. So
I think it
that
makes,
part I understand.
When you have parity, or at least on some level of parity, it allows people to open up more.
You would think so, right?
Yeah.
I think it would. I think it would. So thank you for your input, sir.
Yeah.
And look for River Talk leading up to, well, it's a big time in news talk and just talk in general with the midterm elections coming up next month. And we look forward to Brian's take on all of that, not just politics, but life in general on his program. It's time for Overtime on Geick's Got Game, and again, my pleasure to be with you once again. And well, speaking of goals, Jack Johnson, the much maligned Jack Johnson, scored his first Penguins goal in a 9-1 victory for Pittsburgh over Calgary late last night in the province of Alberta. And Jack Johnson, he's not without merits, right? He has some flashy skills, if you will. No, he's not very fast, but he's very physical. He lays big hits. Some fans like that. I like it better when it's effective hitting, effective physicality. But neither here nor there in this moment. You can see why. I'll put it this way: you can see why Jack Johnson was such a highly sought after draft pick back in the day. Why he went so high in the draft more than a decade ago. And it's because of the physicality. It's because of his size. It's because of his shot. He can bring it both from the point and a little bit closer, as we saw last night. So he's not without his skills. He's not Rob Scuderi. I'll put it that way. He's not some slug knocking it off the glass and out. But I also think, and I still think, as much as I did 3-4 months ago when the Penguins made this signing, that committing to Jack Johnson for longer than a year or two as some sort of a rehab project, talking about rehab on the ice, by the way. I'm not besmirching Jack off the ice in any way, just to be clear, but in some sort of a player rehabilitation, as we've seen with the Penguins in the past. Maybe Jamie Alexiak being the most recent example of that. I don't have an issue with that sort of thing with Jack Johnson. But to sign him for 5 years and to commit that much term in addition to money, that didn't make a lot of sense. And I think you're seeing already the cause and effect of that. You're seeing, well, on the bright side for the Penguins, Chris Letang playing great hockey. He and Brian Dumoulin look like a true number one pairing and look like a pairing that Mike Sullivan and his coaches, Jacques Martin, who runs the D, they can rely upon in this season and maybe many, many years into the future. So that's a good thing. But with Jack Johnson on the ice, I know that Mike Sullivan said that none of those goals that he was on the ice for against Edmonton on Tuesday were Jack Johnson's fault. And I agree. It's really hard to pin a goal on one guy in hockey. It's a 5-man game. It's a 6-man game. You throw the goaltender into the mix too. And, well, I suppose sometimes you can say that was just a bad goal for a goalie to give up. But if you're a skater, there are very few moments when you can say that it's all on you. But if a lot of goals are partially on you, that's a problem as well. And even if you can think the game okay, but you still can't get to the spots, then that's a problem too. There are no brownie points in pro hockey or pro sports in general. You either execute or you don't. You either get to the spot or you don't. And I seriously doubt, both from looking at long-term trends and numbers, looking how Jack Johnson has dragged down his team in his entire career, really, whether he's with LA or Columbus and now with Pittsburgh, and it's carrying into Pittsburgh now, where he's looking to be a detriment to their 5-on-5 play and keeping the puck in the opponent's end as opposed to vice versa. But also just watching some of these plays and the eye test, if you will, you got to mix that in, right? Your personal observations. He doesn't appear tailored to the modern game, Jack Johnson does. And I talked about speed and quickness. Maybe he has some straight line speed, but whether it be mentally not thinking the game as quickly as he should or needs to be a good defender in today's sport, or literally physically not being able to reach those points, to get to those spots, to use a term that I like to throw out there quite a bit, well, Jack Johnson is just going to be a second or a third tier guy for you. So that puts the onus on the coaching staff to make the most of a bad deal, of a bad signing for Jim Rutherford and the front office. And so far, maybe what we saw in Calgary is a good harbinger of things to come, because Johnson was not used a lot in defensive zone draws to start shifts. He was used more in advantageous situations. Like I said, the guy can shoot. He can make a play. He has some ability to chip in at the offensive end, which is good. And if you can perhaps position him better to do those sorts of things, well, then that would be awesome. And that would be ideal. However, when you have too many of those guys, say if you feel like you need to position Oli Mata in a spot like that. We've seen Jamie Alexiak used in a quote-unquote sheltered role, to use the modern nomenclature there. You can't shelter everybody, basically. And as Alan Saunders, our guest on the show earlier this morning, tweeted this tweeted about last night's game. Just throw Letang and Dumoulin out there for 50 minutes a night, and that'll be a done deal. Maybe in the past you could have done that with players, being able to control games more when the speed of hockey was slower. You saw defensemen play 30, 35 minutes a night. It doesn't happen anymore. It's not feasible. You run guys into the ground that way. So short term, I think Mike Sullivan and his staff, like I mentioned, Jacques Martin running the D, I think they figured out that Jack Johnson should not be put in situations where he's a shutdown defender, where he's getting the hard minutes. He needs easier minutes. Now, the issue will be, does he need sheltered more than other guys, like a Chad Ruedel, who was also in the lineup last night, like a Jamie Alexiak, like an Ole Mata. With Justin Schultz out, that puts a lot of players in positions where maybe they are a little bit underqualified for their workload. And that'll be the challenge going forward for the Penguins. And that's where the Johnson signing hurts, because with the number of years you committed and with the money you're paying him, barring a buyout in the future, you almost have to keep him in the lineup somewhere, and that means that he is going to be getting these favorable situations where others might not, and that could, in the end, hurt the team that way. So it's not just about the on-ice numbers for Jack Johnson. It's about the effect on the team. And, I'm interested to see how the Penguins continue to handle this situation. Maybe they can coax good production out of him, but it could also have a deleterious effect on his teammates. This has been Gike's Got Game. Thank you for listening all the way through, all 3 periods and an overtime today. I am Matt Gajka, reminding you that when the radio fades, you know life's moving fast. Thanks to Brian Crawford. Thanks to you. I'll be back with you in 1 week's time, same place, here at Mr. Small's Theater in Millvale on the River's Edge.